It's this many. That's the total number of unique ways you can set up the board in Settlers of Catan. And that is not an estimation, it is exactly that much, but if you're playing with the 5 to 6 player expansion, it's this many. So if you just wanted the answer so you could share it with your friends, there you go. But if you're curious as to how we actually calculate this number, well, it's a lot less straightforward than you might assume. Which I realized when I looked this up and saw that nobody had ever answered this question before. That's right. No one. Despite Catan being one of the most popular board games ever, it seems nobody's actually sat down and tried to calculate the total number of unique board permutations. The closest I was able to find was a handful of Reddit and Quora threads of people giving very rough estimates and otherwise wrong answers, but nobody spent the time to truly get it. Until me. So here's a fully exhaustive and completely accurate assessment into the total number of board permutations in Settlers of Catan. So first off, Catan is a board game comprised of 4 components. 6 frame pieces making the edge of the board, 9 harbor pieces that are placed randomly along the frame, 19 hexagon-shaped tile pieces that are placed randomly inside the frame, and 18 numbered tokens that are placed randomly on every hex tile, with the exception of the desert, which remains numberless. Now, your first thought might be to determine how many different ways we can arrange the 19 tiles in the center. I mean, that seems straightforward, but it's also wrong. That will not work, and the reason that won't work is because after placing all of the hex tiles, you have to place all of the numbered tokens on top of those tiles. Now, most people I know just place them in a spiral using the letters on the back to sort them, but they can be placed randomly atop every non-desert tile. Now, why is placing the numbers randomly afterwards an issue? Well, because we can't actually place the numbers randomly on the board. You see, the 6s and 8s, which are colored red to distinguish them from the rest of the set, have restrictions. Specifically, no red number can be placed next to any other red number. They have to be placed on 4 non-adjacent tiles. This first 8 I can place anywhere on the board, but once I place it in the center, I can't place any of the other red numbers on any of the 6 tiles neighboring the 8. Meaning, before we can determine the total number of ways we can arrange all 18 numbers, we first need to find all possible sets of 4 non-adjacent tiles. That might seem fine, still no reason to suspect why we can't start with the total number of unique tile permutations, right? But question, how many different ways can you select 4 non-adjacent tiles from this map? This might seem complicated, but still answerable. After all, it's just a graph theory problem. Or it would be if it weren't for one thing. Where's the desert? Remember, no number token is ever placed on the desert, so we can't just pick 4 tiles at random. And the desert removes potential adjacencies we'd have to check for, but we don't know how many adjacencies will be removed until we choose the desert. If the desert is in the center of the map, then it removes a tile adjacent to 6 other tiles. But if the desert is in the corner, well, then it removes a tile adjacent to only 3. So we can't just calculate the total number of ways to arrange 19 tiles and then multiply it by the total number of sets containing 4 non-adjacent tiles, because how many sets there are depends on where one of the 19 tiles is. So this is why we need to handle the desert problem first. We need to determine how many different ways we can select 4 non-adjacent tiles for every possible desert location before we can calculate how many ways we can arrange the remaining 18 tiles. So to start, there are pretty simply 19 possible locations for the desert. So for all 19 of those locations, we need to ask ourselves how many different ways can we select 4 non-adjacent tiles, not including the desert that we just selected. Figuring this out mathematically seemed impossible. I mean, there are 3,060 different ways to select 4 tiles out of the 18 remaining, and eliminating the sets that contain adjacencies would mean evaluating every single one of them. So I did the only thing I could. Brute force. Using a little bit of recursive magic, I was able to select each tile, designated to be the desert tile, then iteratively go through all groups of 4 tiles of the 18 remaining, only adding those that contained non-adjacent tiles. Doing that, I found out that if the desert is in the center, there are 420 ways to select 4 non-adjacent tiles. If the desert is on the inner ring, there are 461 ways. If the desert is in the very corner, there are 381 ways. And if the desert is on the edge, there are 418 ways to select 4 non-adjacent tiles. So 1 center, 6 inner rings, 6 corner tiles, and 6 edge tiles leaves us with 7,980 different ways to select 1 desert and 4 non-adjacent tiles. Now keep in mind, this just designates the tiles on the board where the red numbers will be. The exact tiles underneath them haven't been placed yet. Additionally, this just designates which of the 4 tiles will have red numbers on them, but not which of those will have a 6 and which will have an 8. Luckily, this is an easy fix. There are 4 red numbers, 2 6s, and 2 8s, so the number of ways to arrange those numbers on any 4 tiles is going to be 4 factorial divided by 2 times 2. Or 6. So for each of the 7,980 different ways we can select 1 desert and 4 non-adjacent tiles, there are 6 ways we can place the red numbers on those tiles, giving us 47,880 different ways to select 1 desert and 4 red numbers, with none of those red numbers being adjacent to each other. Now we can place the rest of the tiles. Since we've already placed the desert, there's only 18 left, with no restrictions as to which tiles can go in which spot. So the number of ways we can place the 18 remaining tiles will be 18 factorial divided by 4 factorial times 4 factorial times 4 factorial times 3 factorial times 3 factorial. factorial, or 12,864,852,000. This accounts for the fact that there are 4 of the forest, pasture, and field tiles, and 3 of the mountain and hills tiles. After placing all the tiles, we can now place the remaining numbers. We've already placed 4 of them, the red ones, so we only have 14 left to place. And again, there are no restrictions as to which of the 14 tiles we can place them on. So the number of ways we can place the remaining 14 numbers will be 14 factorial divided by 2 to the 6, or 1,362,160,800, where we're dividing by 2 to the 6 to account for the fact that there are 6 identical pairs of numbers among the 14 remaining, the 3, 4, 5, and 9, 10, 11. Now, the final aspect is the frame. Now, most people I know just play Catan using the frame in a single fixed position, dictated by the numbers on the edges of each of the frame pieces. That would mean there's only one way to arrange the frame and nothing else to take into account. However, the game does allow you to arrange the frame however you want, and more so gives you 9 separate harbor pieces that you place atop the harbors on the frame to randomize it further. Now, if we're placing the harbor pieces atop the harbors already on the frame, you might think how the frame is constructed wouldn't matter. After all, we're going to be covering up these images anyway. That's why I'm calculating this number and you're not. How the frame is arranged still affects our final setup, even if every single harbor is later covered by a harbor piece. And that's because while these pieces may change the specific harbor at each location, they don't change the location of the harbor itself. Each of the 6 frame pieces has either 1 or 2 harbors. A harbor on a frame piece with only 1 harbor will be in a different location than a harbor on a frame piece with 2 harbors. Meaning, the arrangement of the frame still affects how these harbors are distributed. You could have the same 9 harbors in the exact same sequence, but still have a distinct map because of how those harbors are distributed. So first we need to figure out how many different ways the harbors can be distributed around the frame, given the 6 frame pieces. There are 3 frame pieces that have 2 harbors and 3 frame pieces that have 1 harbor. Since the harbors themselves will be replaced by the individual harbor pieces later, we can treat frame pieces with the same number of harbors as identical. So the number of ways to arrange those 6 frame pieces would be 6 factorial divided by 3 factorial times 3 factorial, or 20. Now to arrange the 9 harbor pieces atop the frame, well, there are 4 identical 3-to-1 harbors and 5 distinct 2-to-1 harbors, 1 for each resource. So the total number of ways to arrange the 9 harbor pieces on the 9 locations is just 9 factorial divided by 4 factorial, or 15,120. Now if you're screaming, but what about rotational symmetry? Don't worry, we're getting there. Luckily, due to how the frame is constructed, rotations don't affect as much as you might think. If we were to take the tiles and numbers in the center of the map and rotate them 60 degrees, we actually wouldn't have a rotationally symmetrical map. And that's because while the tiles placement relative to each other hasn't changed, the tiles placement relative to the harbors around the frame has changed, resulting in a functionally different map, which is why we couldn't discuss rotational symmetry until the frame was constructed. If this is difficult to intuit, take a look at this simpler square graph that'll demonstrate the same principle. Rotating the colors on the inside creates a different map because the pieces on the border are in different positions relative to the pieces in the center. It's only after we rotate the border pieces as well that we get 2 maps that are rotationally symmetric and thus effectively the same. If we were to rotate both the frame and the pieces in the center 60 degrees, that would result in a map rotationally symmetric to the one we started with. Given that the map is a hexagon, there are 6 different ways to create rotationally symmetric maps for each state, meaning we would divide the total number of map permutations by 6 to account for this. However, again, we can only assume this if we can guarantee that rotating the map 60 degrees will never result in the same map. If rotation creates a map that is identical to our original state and not just rotationally symmetrical to it, then dividing by 6 would actually overcorrect this final estimate. Luckily, we can guarantee that. There are a couple different ways to see this for yourself. The easiest is probably just the pieces along the frame. There are 5 unique harbor pieces, so any rotation will result in a different map, because by definition, any unique piece will map into a different location unless it's in the center. But these pieces can't be in the center because, well, they're on the edge. But this brings us to the second thing you've been screaming at your phone. What about reflections? Don't we have to divide the total number of map permutations by 12 and not by 6, as there's 6 axes of reflection for every possible map? Unfortunately, no. I wish that were the case. It would have made this a lot easier. Due to the relative locations of the harbors on the frame itself, reflection doesn't always create a valid map. Sometimes it'll create harbors spaced apart in a way that is impossible to construct with the 6 frame pieces. To see this, we need to take a closer look at all 20 ways the frame can be arranged, because it's the frame's construction that is making this more complicated. In total, these are all the ways you can arrange the frame with the 6 frame pieces, with 2 representing the frame pieces that have 2 harbors, which I'll call doubles, and 1 representing the frame pieces with 1 harbor, which I will call singles. You can actually divide all of these permutations into just 2 separate groups, those that have 2 doubles neighboring each other, and those that don't. Since these permutations are all cyclical, meaning the last digit actually neighbors the first digit on the map itself, there are only 2 permutations that don't have any neighboring doubles. 1 2 1 2 1 2 and 2 1 2 1 2 1. These are the only permutations that have any valid reflections. Why? Well, take a note of the shape of each of the doubles here. Each piece has 5 sandy edges. The 2 harbors are placed on the 2nd edge and on the 5th edge, with 2 edges in between them. But when we connect the 2 doubles, the harbor pieces closest to the border will be exactly 1 edge apart. Each of these harbors are on 2 separate pieces, but there's only 1 space in between them once connected. Now, look at these doubles on a full frame. If we place the axis of symmetry at a 180-degree angle, such that it bisects one of the 2 harbors, after reflection, the bisected harbor will be in the same location, but the lower harbor will map onto the other piece, placing both of them on the same frame piece, only 1 edge apart. This spacing is impossible to recreate with any of the frame pieces because no frame pieces have harbors that close together. The same thing will happen if I place the axis of symmetry vertically from edge to edge. Because of the way the orientation of the frame pieces shift as we move around the board, the reflection will still result in those 2 harbors sitting on the same piece, only 1 edge apart. We can see this is true for all 6 axes of reflection on a hexagon. No matter which axis I choose, the resulting reflection will result in both of these harbors resting on the same piece exactly 1 edge apart. Meaning, so long as the frame has at least 2 neighboring doubles, no reflections will result in a map constructible with these pieces. However, if the frame doesn't have any neighboring doubles, meaning the pieces alternate, then there will be 6 valid reflections for every single map. Due to the rotational symmetry around the frame for this pattern specifically, we only need to check 2 axes of reflection to demonstrate this. Those where the axis goes from edge to edge, and those where the axis goes from vertex to vertex. We can see pretty plainly that the harbors are perfectly symmetrical as the axis goes from vertex to vertex, meaning the relative locations of all these harbors will just reflect onto the same position and thus obviously be valid. If the axis goes from edge to edge, this becomes harder to notice. It might seem like after reflection we've created a map impossible to recreate, but remember, the thing we care about is whether or not we can reproduce how these harbors are distributed. And in fact, this distribution is identical to just taking the original frame and rotating it 60 degrees. Meaning we can indeed achieve this exact same distribution without breaking any of the frame's geometry. Meaning, all in all, we have 20 possible permutations for all the frame pieces, but only 2 of them have any valid reflections. Those 2 permutations have 6 valid reflections in addition to the 6 rotations. And just like with rotations, no reflection will ever map onto itself. And remember, for each of these frame permutations, we have 15,120 different ways we can arrange the ships around the frame. Factoring all this in, the total number of ways we can arrange the frame and its ships, after assembling all the tiles and accounting for any reflections or rotations that result in equivalent maps, will be 18 times 15,120 divided by 6 plus 2 times 15,120 divided by 12, or 47,880. This exact number just happened to pop up twice. This equation separates our 20 frame pieces into 2 distinct groups, 18 of them only having 6 valid rotations, and the other 2 having 6 valid reflections in addition to the 6 rotations, or 12 equivalent variations in total. Meaning, in total, we have 47,880 ways to select 1 desert and 4 red numbers, 12,864,852,000 ways to arrange the remaining 18 tiles, 1,362,160,800 ways to arrange the remaining 14 numbers, and 47,880 ways to arrange the frame and all of the harbors, taking into account any reflections or rotations. Multiply all these together, and the total number of unique map constructions in Catan is this many, which is roughly 40 octillion, or 4 times 10 to the 28th. Now, what about the 5 to 6 player expansion? 5 to 6 player expansion adds the following pieces to the board: 11 hex tiles, 2 for every single resource and 1 desert, 10 number tiles, 1 for every single number, giving us 6 red numbers instead of 4, 4 mini frame pieces, 2 of which are blank, and 2 harbor pieces, which actually didn't come with my expansion for some reason, but other people seem to have them, so I'm including them in the final count. Calculating the total number of board permutations will involve, luckily, mostly the same logic, just with different inputs. The easiest thing to calculate first will be the total number of ways to arrange the non-desert tiles. Before, this was calculated by doing this. Now we have 28 non-desert tiles, 6 of each of the pasture, field, and forest, and 5 of each of the mountain and hill tiles, giving us 472 quadrillion, 715 trillion, 230 billion, 203,216. Calculating the total number of ways to arrange the non-red numbers is also pretty straightforward. Before, it was like this. Now we have 22 non-red numbers, 6 sets of matching triples, and 2 identical pairs, as the 2s and 12s are now double, giving us 6 quadrillion, 22 trillion, 809 billion, 112 million, 320,000. Now, how many different ways can we place these 6 red numbers on 6 non-adjacent tiles? That's the hardest part. Calm down. We'll get to that later. The next fairly straightforward transfer would be calculating the total number of ways we could arrange the frame. Before, we only had 6 pieces, 3 doubles, and 3 singles. This is still true, but now we have an additional 4 mini frame pieces placed in between them. They are always placed in the exact same 4 spots, so luckily this is just a matter of how many different ways we can arrange them. 2 of them are identical, as they're blank, and 2 of them are effectively identical, as they both have harbors on the left side, and we're going to be covering up those harbors later, giving us 4 factorial divided by 2 times 2, or 6 ways to arrange the mini pieces after arranging the rest of the frame, for a total of 20 times 6, or 120 ways to arrange the frame as a whole. Now we also have 2 additional harbors to add, one 2-to-1 sheep harbor and one 3-to-1 harbor. Before, we calculated the total number of harbor arrangements with this, but now we have 11 total harbors, 5 3-to-1 harbors, and 2 sheep harbors, giving us 11 factorial divided by 5 factorial times 2, or 166,320. Now let's talk about rotations and reflections again. Luckily, the number of possible rotations is reduced due to the elongated shape of the hexagon. Due to this new shape, the only viable rotation is rotating the board 180 degrees, as that's the only rotation that maintains the same shape that we started with. Reflections, however, are entirely impossible due to this mini frame piece that is a harbor on its left side. To see this, let's draw the frame in its entirety, placing this mini frame piece in all 4 possible locations because it has to be placed in one of them. Given the elongated shape of the hexagon, there are only 2 possible axes of reflection, one vertical and one horizontal. If we reflect the harbors on these pieces across the vertical axis, we can see that regardless of where that mini frame piece was placed, the harbor will be reflected such that it lies on the 4th edge of a larger frame piece. This is impossible. No frame piece has a harbor on its 4th edge. Singles have it on their 3rd, and doubles have it on their 2nd and 5th. Coincidentally enough, the exact same thing happens if we try reflecting over the horizontal axis. No matter where that mini was placed, the harbor will be reflected such that it lands on the 4th edge of a larger frame piece. Meaning, there are no valid reflections to consider when playing with the 5 to 6 player expansion. All we have are 2 possible ways to rotate the board. Now for the most complicated part. The desert. Before, we were only placing 1 desert among 19 tiles, and then placing 4 red numbers somewhere on the board. Now we have 2 deserts, 30 locations to choose from, and 6 red numbers. Given that we have 2 deserts to place and 30 places to choose from, the total number of ways we can pick initial deserts is not 19, but 30 choose 2, or 435. And just like before, for each of those 435 desert locations, we need to determine all possible ways we can select 6 non-adjacent tiles for the red numbers. Only one way to do this that I know how to do: brute force. And this time, it's a lot of brute force. So using the same logic as before, I iterated through all 435 possible desert pairs, and then enumerated all possible sets of 6 non-adjacent tiles. If you remember, without the 5 to 6 player expansion, there were 7,980 different ways to select 1 desert and then 4 non-adjacent tiles. Now there are 5,926,548 ways to select 2 deserts and 6 non-adjacent tiles. Of course, that's not the full story. We also have to arrange the 6 red numbers on those 6 tiles. Luckily, that's fairly simple, with only 3 6s and 3 8s to place. That's 6 factorial divided by 3 factorial times 3 factorial, or just 20. We have 20 different ways to arrange these 6 numbers after selecting a desert and 6 non-adjacent tiles. Now that we've calculated the last part of the board, the total number of possible board permutations will be 472,715,230,203,216 ways to arrange the 28 non-desert tiles, 6,22,809,112,320,000 ways to arrange the 22 non-red numbers, 120 ways to arrange the pieces around the frame, 166,320 ways to arrange the ships atop the harbors on the frame, 5,926,548 ways to select 2 deserts and 6 non-adjacent tiles, 20 ways to arrange the 6 numbers atop those 6 tiles, all of which divided by 2 to account for 2 possible rotations, giving us roughly 3 quadecillion, or 3 times 10 to the 45th, different ways to arrange the board in Settlers of Catan while using the 5 to 6 player expansion.